CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. The EU versus Poland and Hungary. Europe's top court hears the case. Amid fears Warsaw is moving towards leaving the bloc.
Austria's new Chancellor is sworn in as the ruling party fights corruption allegations threatening the government's survival.
UK leaders hold crisis talks with businesses asking for help in the face of soaring gas prices.
And why there's no time to waste to save our planet's species. The UN Biodiversity Summit kicks off in Kunming.
The European Court of Justice is hearing arguments in a case brought by Hungary and Poland, challenging EU rules that link the bloc's funding to the respect of rule of law.
It comes amid heightened tensions within the bloc after Poland's top court ruled some EU laws were incompatible with its constitution, a ruling backed by Hungary. Well, Penelope Liesch is in Budapest for us. So, Penelope, what's this case all about?
Robin, this is a case and a stance that Poland and Hungary have been standing by for quite some time. Around the end of last year, both moved to block the EU decisions and budgets around changing the way that funding is distributed within the European Union and putting in a mechanism that allows it to be withheld from countries that breach the rule of law. We have seen in recent times the right-wing ruling governments in both Hungary and Poland coming to blows with the European Union over a number of issues around LGBTQ rights, media freedom and judicial independence. So it was a number of months ago that they brought this particular case up. It is only now that it's being heard in the European Union's highest court. So the decision on that will have large ramifications going forward for funding to different states. We know at this point Poland and Hungary, unlike other countries, have not received the green light for their COVID recovery budgets because they have failed to comply with different directions from the European Commission and the European Court of Justice in Brussels.
So how is all this being received in Hungary and Poland?
Well, Prime Minister Viktor Orban here in Hungary has said that he will go ahead and make plans to basically spend this recovery budget before it's given to him. There was a deadline missed at the end of last month, but the Hungarian government ploughing forward, choosing to spend the money before it's actually here. The Polish government has called the EU withholding their recovery funding in particular as illegal, calling for that to be released to them, and we understand those discussions are still ongoing. But interestingly, just last week we saw this very important decision come from the Polish Constitutional Tribunal, finding that EU law, in fact, goes below Polish law when it comes to a number of treaties in the country, essentially saying that Polish law has primacy. Now, this is something the government had long pushed for, as the government has pushed back against a number of ECJ decisions and a number of other directions that have been given to Poland, and wants to have the final say over a number of issues in the country. Now, that sparked protests across the nation on Sunday. Around 100,000 people rallied in Warsaw, more at other locations, around 100 spots around Poland, calling for EU law and the rule of law to be upheld and for Poland to stay in the EU, as there's now concerns that this decision is another step towards Poland potentially holding a Polexit and leaving, as the United Kingdom did leave the EU during Brexit. However, the Polish Prime Minister has said at this stage there are no plans for the country to leave. We have heard just in the last few minutes, though, that the EU Commissioner to the Czech Republic is saying that if the EU does not challenge this particular constitutional decision made by that Polish Constitutional Tribunal, that the entire bloc could collapse. And there are certainly concerns from MEPs that there needs to be one law and one law alone applied to all the members of the 27-nation bloc, not just different rules for Poland and Hungary, who are holding on through different legal means to try and hold their positions. Robin?
Penny, thank you very much. Penelope Liesch there in Budapest.
For more, we're joined by Elaine Fahy, law professor at City University of London. Thank you very much indeed for coming to Global Business. So we just heard Penny mention Polexit there, Poland's legal exit from the European Union. Do you think it will really come to that?
Well, I think it's a very difficult juncture in time, but of course the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, a totally different legal order to the EU legal order, has also found the Polish Constitutional Tribunal to be illegally constituted, as it were. So the EU is not the only legal order looking at the Polish legal order and saying there are many serious issues with this. And the EU institutions have very much dragged their heels for a long period of time. But what's happening now is that they are showing Poland in particular now that you have to obey the rule of law in order to obtain enormous financial assistance. So I'm not so sure Polexit it's very much it's not something on the ground. There's massive support for EU membership, remember, and there's also a massive need for EU funds. But what is much more concerning for the EU is the loss of values, leaving the EU effectively by default. But at the same time, Poland is in a very weak position. In contrast, is not in a situation at all remotely close to Brexit, and there's a huge financial dependency. So there's a lot at play. But ultimately, the EU is not the only legal order that's looking at Poland and saying this is, as a matter of international law, as a matter of legal order, is not lawfully constituted as a court. It's not a real court.
And what do you think the ruling could mean in practical terms if Poland does ignore EU law? What kind of actions are we likely to see from Poland?
Well, I'm not so able to suggest you what Poland is likely to do as a matter of EU law. The EU has many tools at its disposal to go after those who do not comply with its judgment. There's certain legal tools, and the Commission President has forcefully stated that von der Leyen has stated that the EU is extremely concerned by the situation. So there are enormous fines that Poland can be subjected to, and again, the financial penalty mechanism here is really significant, and we've seen this in other contexts, them backing down after the financial situation, taking them to the brink. So there are many ways that this can play out, but ultimately the EU is the stronger partner. It is a party in a situation where there's billions of euros at stake.
You mentioned the legitimacy of the court itself being contested because of the way that the judges were appointed. What more background can you give us about this tribunal?
Well, my expertise is in international relations and global governance, but this tribunal is, one of a series of actions that are taking place in Poland that are becoming globally more the study of a significant study, copying the practices taking place in Hungary, packing courts with favourites of the government and engaging in disciplinary action against those who are not disposed to the government. And it's happening in many places of the world. There are many studies of populism all over the globe, but in particular, they hone in upon matters in Poland and in Hungary initially. So it's a playbook that is playing out in many other contexts. It's not very original in that regard, and there are many forms of it, but Poland is unfortunately the study of this for packing courts that are close to the administration. And this is what is of much concern internationally, but also across the EU.
So you mentioned that the EU is the bigger player here. Is there anything that the EU can do about Poland breaking the rules? If it can't expel Poland from the club, what else can it do?
Well, as I've already indicated, there are many ways in which the compliance of EU law is fostered, and principally through law, the rule of law. The EU itself is a legal order based upon the rule of law. There are means and mechanisms by which those who are not complying with the rule of law can be followed up. And we see that the Commission instituting proceedings against, for example, Poland. If you do not comply with the judgment of the Court of Justice, there are further procedures that can be followed to fine for each day in which the decision is not adhered to. But there are certain procedural steps that are quite complex. But ultimately, the financial dimension of the litigation that the earliest reporter mentioned going on today is the really important things. What will be the outcome of that litigation about this, the rule of law conditionality to this financing? And if you're not complying with the rule of law and not getting the COVID financing, there's going to be an enormous implication there for Poland. So I think that is the billions of euros literally at stake. That is the carrot and stick in all of this, because just generally this is going on for a very long time, and the Commission has largely been fighting out many of these battles before the courts. But I also mentioned to you that this is taking place in the Strasbourg courts as well. So there are more and more international courts looking at this, but the one with the most fining or sanctioning power is in fact the EU's legal order through its court based in Luxembourg, through its administration based in Brussels.
Well, thank you very much indeed for explaining all that to us. Professor Elaine Fahy from City, University of London. Thank you. Staying with the region, the weekend election in the Czech Republic produced a setback for another ally of the Polish and Hungarian leaders, Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, losing his majority. What happens next was further complicated by the hospitalisation of the Czech president on Sunday. 77-year-old Miloš Zeman is being treated for complications to an unknown chronic condition. He's due to lead post-election talks about forming a new coalition government and favours giving Babiš a chance before the opposition.
The EU has confirmed that President Xi Jinping will speak with European Council President Charles Michel on Friday. It comes after European Union leadership talks last week, during which there was a discussion of how the bloc should engage with China going forward. Austria's new Chancellor has been sworn in. Former Foreign Minister Alexander Schallenberg succeeds Sebastian Kurz, who resigned on Sunday after he and 9 others were placed under investigation for financial corruption. Johannes Pleshberger reports from Vienna.
The Austrian government crisis has ended for the time being with the replacement of Chancellor Sebastian Kurz with the former Foreign Minister Alexander Schallenberg. Kurz is taking a back seat as party leader after stepping down in response to a long-running corruption probe. Schallenberg was sworn in as the new Austrian Chancellor by President Alexander van der Bellen in a ceremony at the Hofburg Palace in Vienna. The new Chancellor has already met with his Green coalition partners and said the government budget, which has not yet been passed in Parliament, will be implemented as planned. Schallenberg is well experienced in the international arena. He grew up in India, Spain and France and studied law in Vienna, Paris and Belgium. Austria's domestic and foreign policy is not expected to change, remaining pro-EU and maintaining a hard line against taking in refugees from Afghanistan. Federal President van der Bellen warned that because of the corruption allegations against Kurz and 9 other people, trust in politics has been massively shaken. Meanwhile, the opposition claims that Sebastian Kurz continues to pull the strings as party leader, and a parliamentary committee will be set up before the end of the year to look into these previous election polls, which, according to the claims, were bought with taxpayers' money and engineered to suit Sebastian Kurz's interest. One thing is certain, the former Chancellor is going nowhere quickly. Johannes Pleshberger, CGTN, Vienna.
Still ahead on the programme, keeping the clerics in power. Iraq awaits election results from a parliamentary vote.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
billions of years of evolution on Earth. Different life forms sharing one planet, from single cells to complex ecosystems. They integrate, split, prosper, and perish. They affect our planet and are in turn affected by this diversified world of which humans are a part. It's time to build a shared future for all on Earth. Tune in to CGTN's special coverage on our global commitment to the planet.
Welcome back. British industry leaders have held another round of talks with the government over soaring energy costs. Bosses from the steel, ceramics and paper sectors are calling for a price cap. They're warning their factories could close unless the government takes action. CGTN's Andrew Wilson has been following the meeting for us. So, Andrew, is industry making a persuasive case for help?
I think they probably are. In the end, it's going that way. They've been quite clear over the last 10 days or so that things are very serious. In the last 48 hours or so, they've started talking quite convincingly and credibly about factory closures, about job losses, about not being able to make it through until Christmas. One senior CEO at a steel company said he doesn't think his company will be around for Christmas the way things are going. So they're really pulling all the alarm bells and trying to gather the government's attention to see if they can't bail them out in some way or put some kind of cap on the energy bills they might be facing. To give you an example, a company with a bill of, say, $80 million in a year or $60 million in a year for energy is now looking at something like double that, 160 million, something like that. So things are very serious, and some of these plants really are facing the prospect of having to close down. This has gone through the business secretary. He's been most active on these, going to these talks. It's not always the business secretary himself going on talks. It's sometimes junior ministers from his department, but nonetheless, there's definitely an intelligence gathering operation going on with Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, front and centre of this. Boris Johnson is away on holiday at the moment, although messages are coming out of Downing Street that he's taking a keen interest. And on a sidebar issue, a company called CF Industries, which produces carbon dioxide, which was looking to shut down because of problems with energy, has now said it'll keep going at least until January, which doesn't do much for the steel, ceramic and glass companies, but it does supply a boost for the food industry, which was also facing its own mini crisis over energy supplies and being able to supply CO2 as a result to store and produce processed food. So there is some activity on the horizon and some actually taking place at the moment. But as we can see, it's all focused around the business department at the moment. This was Kwasi Kwarteng on a chat show yesterday talking about the problem.
Clearly, I'm speaking to industry, as you've said, all the time. And high gas prices, they've quadrupled this year, are making an impact. And that's why I'm, as you say, speaking to people, listening.
And, Andrew, do we think the government could be persuaded to step in eventually?
I think that the pressure will eventually, Paul, come from Downing Street, number 10 Downing Street, with the Prime Minister away on holiday at the moment. He had to cut short his holiday for previous emergencies about a month ago, so he's quickly grabbing another one before business starts again in earnest. So that can explain some of the delays in government action. Thus far, the Treasury has been extremely reticent on the issue. Yesterday, the Business Secretary said that he was in talks with the Treasury, and the Treasury was actually involved in talking to some of these industrial leaders. The Treasury immediately issued a denial, saying, I don't know where he got that from, we're not involved in this at all. Well, now the Business Secretary has put out an announcement in the last half hour saying he has submitted a formal application to the Treasury. So there is some disagreement going on behind the scenes, and the Treasury clearly doesn't want to be pushed into promising money to all these industrial leaders at this stage until he knows, or the Chancellor that is, the full extent of the problems that the UK faces. But casting a glance around the world, in Asia, in other parts of Europe and other parts of the world, India as well, with 63% hikes in their energy prices in the last year or so, there's clearly a scramble for natural gas and a scramble for energy going on, and it's affecting different economies in different ways depending on their weaknesses. It does look as if the government's going to have to engage with this sooner rather than later, and that the Chancellor is perhaps going to have to give some ground and satisfy the Business Secretary's application for the Chancellor at least to engage with these companies and start looking at what he can do. To give you an example, one steel company is looking for something like $80 million support from the government for this winter to see it through. That's just one of many companies are now looking for help that they can't manage by themselves.
All right, OK, Andrew Wilson, thank you very much indeed.
China could be heading for more power shortages after severe floods forced the closure of dozens of coal mines. Several northern provinces have experienced blackouts over the past month, driven by soaring demand for power. Beijing has been trying to limit electricity usage at ports and factories while boosting coal production. But floods and torrential rain in Shanxi province have slowed those efforts, driving coal prices to record highs.
China has once again banned the import of British beef from cattle under 30 months old after a case of so-called mad cow disease was detected last month. British beef hasn't been sold in China since the 1990s due to a previous outbreak, which triggered the initial ban. China agreed to lift the restrictions in 2018, but has yet to resume the imports.
Shares in the Australian gambling giant Star Entertainment have fallen amid media claims that it allowed money laundering at casinos. The group has strongly denied reports linking it to financial wrongdoing and organised crime, but promised to take appropriate steps to address the allegations. Stocks closed almost 23% lower on Australian markets.
Chinese property developer Evergrande faces another debt deadline for repayments worth $148 million. The company missed 2 deadlines last month amid widespread concern over huge losses and more than $300 billion in liabilities. Evergrande says it wants to delay full payments of bonds to ease pressure on its finances.
Well, those payments relate to Evergrande's offshore bonds for the next 3 years, and the deadline is at midnight New York time on Monday. So, will it make it? John Terrett in New York is the man to tell us. What do you think, John?
Yes, probably not, but I don't know, and nor does anybody here. And I have to tell you, I'm the only person who cares about Evergrande today here. They're all worrying about many other things other than what may happen regarding this particular country and company. Although I will say this, earlier on today, the futures markets were very negative, and we were putting that down to Evergrande's possible default on its overseas debts and also the rising oil price as well. I have to tell you, in all honesty, you know, Evergrande and Modern Land, these companies, you know, you have to be very, very in the weeds to know about them or to hear about them. They really do not float to the top on the American news agenda in any way. And it's only since the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal have started putting them on the front page that people here have really even heard of these companies, to be honest with you. But now, Robin and Paul, now they have become the poster children for trouble ahead. You know, there may be trouble ahead, and that's what is the song that's going around people's heads here. And they look at the ADRs over at the NASDAQ and some of them at the New York Stock Exchange, and they look at the crackdown that's been going on in Beijing regarding technology and education, and a couple of weeks ago, casinos as well, with those possible reforms in Macau, and they just shrug their shoulders and they wonder what on earth they're to do with investing in ADRs or Chinese stocks who trade here. Now, as you rightly say, the Evergrande deadline is looming. It's about 12 hours from now. That'll be midnight Eastern time, which is 5 a.m. British summertime on Tuesday. That's 04 GMT, 06 on continental Europe. And I think it might, if there is a default, we may very well see headlines bigger than we have here now on Tuesday. And of course, just finally, the concern is that Evergrande appears to be paying back its domestic debts before its overseas one, which I think up to a point is fair enough. But the real worry is that, is this the tip of the iceberg? That's the thing. Is there more going on than we are being told? And is there more of a contagion involving other Chinese organizations and companies? And will that contagion spread around the world here? Now, one footnote, Evergrande has just punished 6 of its executives for taking money out of their accounts earlier than they might, retirement type accounts, earlier than they might otherwise have done, at a time when it's trying to repay $300 billion. The money, I'm told, has been put back, Robin.
And John, you said people were talking about oil prices. They're up around 2% today. How are the markets reacting?
Well, you see, it's easier for people here to understand oil prices because, as you know, this is very much a petroleum-based economy, certainly at the moment, and I think it's going to go on being that way for a very, very long time. I mean, the thing about rising oil prices is it's one of the most obvious, if not the most obvious, sign of inflation. And as you know, the Federal Reserve is telling us at the moment the inflation spike that we're living through, which is really affecting people day to day, particularly those on low incomes, is transitory, and it will go away by the end of the year, maybe a little bit longer, but certainly the end of the year is the target, and it actually won't be permanent. But this, of course, plays into all sorts of things: inflation and interest rates, tapering of the $120 billion asset buying that's been going on. When will that actually happen? The supply chain. I mean, Robin and Paul, who knew that the two words supply and chain would feature in our news bulletins so much? I mean, the supply chains is such an intricate, logistical, sort of, niche issue that they should rise to the top of a television news bulletin is absolutely extraordinary. And it also brings into question the whole notion about how quickly can we get rid of fossil fuels. The management of doing that alongside wind and solar and nuclear is obviously far more complicated than I think we at first thought. And then how long can business go on absorbing the cost of this spike in oil around the world? Now, just to be clear, New Jersey, where I live, we're paying 6 cents a gallon more this week than last, and just over $1 more this year than last. On top of that, food, heating, clothing, it's all going up. West Texas Intermediate, which is Texas tea, is at $81.30 a barrel right now. That's up 2.4%. And the worry, of course, is that this will slow down the global economic recovery after COVID-19. So finally, at the moment, it's a major public holiday here. Actually, not a major public holiday nationwide, but a big one in New York, Columbus Day. There's a big parade going on Fifth Avenue right now. And at the moment, Chevron, would you be surprised to learn, is leading the Dow alongside Goldman Sachs, which is up more than 100 points. So it's recovered from its earlier worries. Paul and Robin?
John, good to talk to you. John Terrett there in New York. Work has begun on what promises to be France's tallest skyscraper. When it's finished, the building in Paris's business district, La Défense, will stand 242 metres high. At just over 50 metres shorter than the Eiffel Tower, it will be the new headquarters of the French oil giant Total Energy. To see the foundations being sunk, go to europe.cgtn.com. And do remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, cgtn.com and the CGTN app.
You're watching Global Business Europe, still ahead. Turning into dust, where we stand in the global fight against land desertification and what needs to be done.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger,
we can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and Paul Barber. Our top stories. The EU versus Poland and Hungary. Europe's top court hears the case amid fears Warsaw is moving towards leaving the bloc.
Austria's new chancellor is sworn in as the ruling party fights corruption allegations threatening the government's survival.
And the UK government holds crisis talks with businesses seeking help in the face of soaring gas prices.
The world's largest biodiversity conference in a decade has opened in southwest China's Yunnan province. The city of Kunming is hosting the United Nations COP15 meeting. World leaders will discuss solutions to better protect nature, and the Chinese president is due to speak via video link during a leaders' summit on Tuesday.
As the world waits to see what's agreed at the summit, experts are highlighting the challenges we face in preserving our planet's species and why there's no time to waste. Matt Stuttard has more.
The biggest biodiversity summit in over a decade plans to discuss targets aimed at conserving 30% of the world's oceans and land by 2030, introducing controls on invasive species and reducing plastic pollution. Officials insist they can agree ambitious plans to transform our understanding and respect for biodiversity and ensure that by 2050 we agree a shared vision of how humans live in harmony with nature. Last year, there was shock when the United Nations reported that world leaders had failed to meet a single biodiversity target agreed in Aichi, Japan in 2010. And scientists claim that right now, humans are causing the 6th mass extinction event in planet Earth's history. At the 2020 World Economic Forum, business leaders said biodiversity loss was the 3rd biggest risk to the world in terms of its likelihood and its severity, behind only climate change and weapons of mass destruction. They put it ahead of infectious diseases, terror attacks and interstate conflict. And perhaps that's not surprising. A 2021 report by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature showed that 28% of all assessed species on the planet are threatened with extinction.
Well, across the world there are currently more than 1,000 seed banks, high-security vaults aimed at preserving genetic diversity.
In Kunming itself, scientists have spent the past 15 years working on one such project. Meng Qingshang explains.
It's a wonderful collection of seeds from wild species. They vary in color, shape, and genetic makeup. Some of them are stored at very low temperatures, while others survive in vitro. With a small number kept in liquid nitrogen, known as cryopreservation. Dr. Lin Liang has a team preserving rare plant species, such as magnolias. Instead of using seeds, they extract plant material such as cells and tissues and keep them at a temperature of around -200 degrees Celsius.
Many magnolia seeds cannot tolerate dehydration. If we store them at -20 degrees Celsius, as we normally do for other species, they would quickly lose vigor.
So far, the team has preserved 15 kinds of magnolia species, over 10% of the total in China. They plan to cover all endangered magnolias across the country, about half of the total in the next 10 years. Here in this germplasm bank, there's another way to preserve the wild species: in vitro banking.
In vitro banking is a safe strategy for the long-term conservation of plant genetic resources. As you can see, most of the samples are the vegetable parts of plants, like the stem and leaf, rather than the seeds. Altogether, this in vitro bank stores more than 2,000 species of wild plants.
Most of the wild species in this bank are orchids, ferns, and succulent plants. Usually, they cannot be stored using conventional methods. We went inside an underground deep freeze chamber to check out the conventional way of keeping seeds. More than 90% of the collections are dried, frozen, and preserved in this way.
This seed bank stores the seeds of over 10,000 wild plant species, more than 1/3 of the country's total. It's extremely cold here. The temperature is -20 degrees Celsius. However, right here, some of the seeds can survive for thousands of years.
The germplasm bank has also developed a DNA barcoding technique to help identify species. Its DNA banks have kept the genes of over 7,000 wild plants, along with 2,000 microbials.
We already conserved 36% of the whole flora of China. So next step for the next 10 years, we would like to conserving something like 20,000. So it will be something like 2/3 of the flora. So this will be another big step.
Since it was launched in 2007, the seed bank has evolved to be the largest of its kind in Asia. With expanding research facilities, it's dedicated to preserving the genetic resources of the most diverse wild species. 孟庆生 CGTN, Kunming, Yunnan Province.
A group of British conservationists are taking a bold approach when it comes to climate change. Rather than try to fight the impact, they say they want to embrace it and allow landscapes to return to their natural states. John Beaver went to southwest England to meet some of them.
Landscapes like this used to be a common sight across northern Europe. But in the UK alone, the amount of heathland has fallen by around 80% in the past 200 years. Picturesque as it is, it's not natural. Thousands of years ago, woods were cleared for settlements, and hundreds of years ago, you wouldn't have seen dog walkers, but commoners using the land and resources for fuel, food and grazing livestock. In an age where replanting and rewilding is king, a conscious decision here in Devon to pursue a different path.
Naturally, this site would have more trees, but we, as society, have made that choice that actually lowland heath is now so rare and so special and supports such a unique suite of species that it's worth making that extra effort to protect it and kind of maintain it as it is. So for us here, it's more about putting the right thing in the right place to maximise the benefits to society across the whole landscape, rather than picking one specific issue such as tree planting and thinking it's the right solution absolutely everywhere.
The pebbled heath supports around 3,000 species of all shapes and sizes. It's just been named a National Nature Reserve to protect it for future generations. In the past 50 years, the population of the UK has grown by 35%. With that increase comes a drastic need for new houses. But with limited space, the pressure on the natural world continues to grow. And climate change is making that pressure worse. Clinton Devon Estates, which owns the heathland, has started a bold new project just a few miles downriver. Faced with increased flooding, they're going to knock down embankments built hundreds of years ago and let farmland return to natural wetland habitats.
If there's infinite amounts of public money, I guess you could keep on shoring it up and making the embankment bigger and bigger. But is that really what we should be doing? Should we be working against nature or working with it? And I think what we want to do is work with nature, accept the inevitable, accept climate change, accept that we need to adapt, and it's how we can do that and get multiple benefits.
As efforts to slow climate change continue, scientists here are doing all they can to help protect the natural world from the changes that are already happening. John Beaver, CGTN, Devon.
Part of the United Nations effort to protect our environment is to reverse the trend of global desertification. Ibrahim Tiao is head of the task force. I asked him how serious an issue land degradation is across the globe.
It is serious. Over the last 10-15 years, the rate of land that is affected by desertification has moved from 42% to 46%. And the scientists are telling us that it may raise to 60% by 2050. So 3.4 billion people in the world are affected by land degradation. So it is pretty serious.
So you as an organisation are aiming for land degradation neutrality by 2030. So what does that mean and how achievable is it?
What it means is that we should avoid converting new land into agriculture, for example. We can produce more with less land and less water. It means that we should reduce the amount of land, the degradation in the land, and it means that we should restore wherever we have a possibility of restoring degraded land. So it is possible to do it, and we see multiple initiatives coming from different parts of the world for large-scale restoration. So it means that we have an opportunity to heal the planet in a way that is more sustainable.
So you mentioned multiple initiatives there. Which regions are facing the biggest challenges, and what are they doing about it?
Let me give you the example of the Sahel in Africa, the southern border of the Sahara, one of the driest areas in the world. 11 countries have come together to restore 100 million hectares. That is pragmatic, it is practical, visible, and it is likely to be one of the most important investments we are doing in that area to save millions of people from hunger, from irregular migration, to reduce pressure on land, to reduce conflicts over access to land and water, and to bring peace and security.
China is also a country that's tackling desertifications. What do you make of China's efforts to try and deal with it?
China, already as a developing country, was developing the largest restoration program on Earth, and they have succeeded in doing so. You know, China has multiple deserts. So it is certainly one of the best examples we have in the world today, where not only public funds have been used for restoring land, but also private investments are being made right now. So it is certainly one of the examples we should all consider following in a way that could set maybe us to the land degradation neutrality that we are talking about.
And what are you hoping for from the upcoming Kunming summit?
We expect the world leaders to come up with a very strong biodiversity framework. They are negotiating the post-2020 framework for biodiversity, and we expect that land restoration and natural resources, terrestrial resources, will be conserved by humanity. So it will be certainly the last chance we have to achieve something big and meaningful by 2030 or 2050. We are in a position now to turn the tipping points into a turning point.
For more on how to fight the encroaching sand, later in the week we'll head to the south of Spain, where farmers are using local solutions to solve the global issue in one of the driest places on Earth. In other news, the International Monetary Fund's annual meeting has been overshadowed this year by a data rigging scandal. It's alleged that the Director General, Kristalina Georgieva, was pressured to change numbers that related to China's doing business ranking. The IMF's 24-member board is meeting to discuss the allegations. Georgieva has denied the allegations. Caroline Malone is live in Washington for us. So what's the latest on this IMF board meeting, Caroline?
Well, there's been the opening sessions of the IMF World Bank annual meetings today. And as you were mentioning there, the IMF's managing director, Georgieva, has been taking part in virtual sessions, including one entitled Reimagining the Workplace for Women, which is a favoured topic of hers. She's spoken already today, Monday, on how bad the pandemic has been for women, especially working mothers who don't have support, and how the pandemic's reverse progress towards gender equity in the workplace. All of this is happening as her position is really being considered by the executive board. As you say there, previously at the World Bank, she served as the CEO and interim president, and an independent report has found that she allegedly pressured staff to change the World Business Report to favour China's rankings. The executive board has said after a number of meetings that it is continuing to discuss those allegations. On Sunday, a spokesperson said they had made progress in an assessment and they're likely to conclude very soon. We know that members are due again to meet today, so it could be a matter of days before that decision is made. Meanwhile, sessions continue with Georgieva every day this week.
So the managing director has categorically denied that she's responsible for any wrongdoing at all in preparation of this doing business report. What has she said, and what kind of backing does she have?
Well, reports suggest that there are actually a number of countries that do still support her, a number of European countries in particular, France, Germany, Italy and the UK, as well as a number of Asian and African nations. But there is definitely scepticism from the United States. The US Treasury has said in a statement that these are serious findings against Georgieva and that they are still analysing the report. Actually, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, Paul Romer, who resigned from the World Bank over what he said was a change in the methodology that gave the impression that politics affected the results. He and others have also said that, look, even these allegations that the head of the IMF has been accused of data manipulation is damaging to the credibility of both the IMF and the World Bank. As you say, Georgieva has absolutely denied any wrongdoing. She said in a statement that she disagrees fundamentally with the findings and the interpretation of the investigation. We should note that the investigation did also find improper changes to the 2020 report, in particular on the rankings of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Azerbaijan. So it's perhaps not an isolated incident here.
Caroline Malone in Washington. Thank you.
Firefighters in Lebanon say they have extinguished a large blaze at a major oil plant just 2 days after fuel shortages triggered a national blackout. The fire broke out on Monday morning in a fuel tank. It's not clear how it started. Electricity supplies had resumed on Sunday night after a 24-hour shutdown.
Tunisia's president has approved a new government 11 weeks after taking power, a move that opponents denounced as a coup. President Kais Saied has handed key ministerial posts to loyalists after suspending parliament and sacking the country's former prime minister in late July.
Outgoing German Chancellor Angela Merkel is wrapping up a 3-day visit to Israel. Much of the discussions have centred on forming a workable nuclear agreement with Iran, one that Israel can accept. Merkel also pledged Germany would preserve a post-Holocaust commitment to Israel's security.
The United States will start sending humanitarian aid to Afghanistan again. That's according to Taliban leaders. It follows the first direct talks between the two sides since the group reclaimed power. US officials did not confirm the news, but called the meeting in Doha candid and professional. The two sides discussed security, terrorism and providing safe passage for American citizens in the country.
Iraqis are waiting for the results of voting in parliamentary elections held over the weekend. Early signs are that the country's main Shia nationalist parties are set to sweep to success in the polls. Well, let's go live now to Baghdad and join Owen Holdaway. So, Owen, what is the latest on the count?
It seems like the Muqtada al-Sadr movement's done particularly well in these elections in terms of their key strongholds of Najaf, Karbala and Mustafa in the south. They seem to have made major gains there at the expense of some of the Maliki and also some of the Hashid parties. In terms of up north, it seems like the Kurdish KDP have made strong gains, for instance, in Erbil, and the other Kurdish vote, the PUK, seems to have fractured. We're still waiting on some results from Anbar and some other areas, as well as Baghdad and Basra. But it seems like the major take-home is that the Sadrist movement, the Sadr party, seems to have made major gains within the parliament, are likely to be the kingmakers in any government going forward.
And what do we know about why it was such a low turnout?
I think that's the key takeaway, to be honest, more so than the composition of the parliament. I mean, the interesting with the parliament, there will be some more independent candidates under this new electoral system, but I think the fact that particularly voter turnout amongst young people was extremely low. I mean, here, for instance, in Baghdad, it was one of the lower areas of turnout, and this was its epicenter of the Tashreen, or the October 29 movement, that was actually calling for these elections and a reformulation of the electoral system to essentially stop the hold of these sectarian parties. The same with the case down south in Najaf and these sort of areas. The young turnout was very low. So I think the danger is any government that is formed from this, it may lack legitimacy, particularly amongst those who decided not to vote and won't see any change in the sectarian system. And that's many ways why the Sadrist parties have gained power, because their supporters actually came out and voted. But a lot of the people who initially called and argued for these early elections didn't see any change, fundamental change, so decided not to come out and vote.
Owen Holdaway in Baghdad, thank you.
Stay with us, still to come. How to get more Germans jabbed. A new plan to save money makes vaccines the sensible option.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. German health authorities are still reporting thousands of new coronavirus infections each day. But a new policy means people won't be able to get tested unless they're showing symptoms or want to pay for the test themselves.
Officials say it's part of an effort to reduce wasteful pandemic spending and encourage those who've so far refused to get vaccinated to do their part. Ryan Thompson has more now from Frankfurt.
Germany is taking a major step in learning to live with the coronavirus. Free citizen tests, or Bürger tests, are no longer available to all. It's not because the pandemic is over here by any means. In fact, the country is still averaging about 8,000 cases per day. But it comes down to this country's health pass system, which is needed to go to restaurants or events or most leisure activities. The government says it's time for people to get vaccinated in order to satisfy the requirement or to start paying for the tests themselves. The government has been the one footing the bill for tests since March, and it's been a pretty hefty price. More than $4 billion has been spent so far this year. The health minister says the hope is that people will be put off by the inconvenience and the added cost and ultimately decide to take up the jab, which is widely available. In a few weeks, those who are still refusing vaccinations will also face a pretty big financial setback if they test positive. That's because compensation for self-isolation will no longer be paid out to non-vaccinated people nationwide who are forced to miss work. Now, the updated policies don't apply to everyone. For those who can't get vaccinated, either because they're too young or their health condition doesn't allow it, testing will remain free and they won't be affected by these work scheme changes. And of course, the same goes for anyone who is showing symptoms of COVID-19. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
It's been called Freedom Day in Australia. Cafes, gyms and restaurants in Sydney are welcoming back fully vaccinated customers. That's after nearly 4 months of lockdown.
Australia is aiming to start living with the coronavirus and gradually reopen the country. Greg Navarro reports.
Xenos Greek restaurant in Sydney has marked a lot of milestones since opening in 1969. But none quite like this. Celebrating its first day of business after a lockdown spanning nearly 15 weeks.
I think everyone is really happy, deep down. And all the customers this morning that have been in here, everyone's had a smile on their face and everyone's been very, very thankful and very grateful to be able to get out of here again. And we're loving having people back.
That sentiment was shared by customers who say the pandemic has changed the way they view freedoms they once took for granted.
You appreciate now maybe more what we had before, because the pleasure of just coming out for a coffee and poached eggs on toast is just sensational.
Australia remained largely untouched by the pandemic until June, when the Delta variant began spreading quickly across Sydney. That triggered an extended lockdown and severe restrictions that state leaders said would only begin to ease once the state reached a total vaccination rate of 70%. Some businesses opened their doors the minute the first easing of restrictions went into effect across Sydney for vaccinated customers only.
I think we're fairly comfortable to jump back in. I think it's been a long way coming. I think, the vaccination rates are looking really promising. I think it's fantastic that we're getting back to the new normal.
Those people not vaccinated have to remain in lockdown until December.
There have been some last-minute changes to the easing of restrictions here thanks to a recent change in leadership in New South Wales, and that's got some health officials concerned, particularly those that apply to the number of people who can now visit households.
Vaccination, while fantastic at reducing serious illness and hospitalisation, only partially reduces the risk of transmission. So we still have significantly more mixing in the community and groups where we have concerns about their risk of hospitalisation, which puts pressure back on the health system.
We will no doubt see case numbers increase. We will see hospitalisations increase, but we've invested significant amounts in our health system. We now need to learn to live alongside the virus.
While going to a restaurant and hitting the gym were popular activities, there was one that clearly topped many wish lists.
Really? You can't tell? Getting my hair cut.
New South Wales is preparing to further ease restrictions later this month when vaccination rates are expected to reach 80%. Ragnar Barham, CGTN, Sydney.
And before we go, this year's Nobel Prize for Economics has been awarded jointly to 3 United States-based economists. David Card, Joshua Angrist and Guido Imbens were recognised for their separate analyses of workforce economics. They looked into the effect of immigration on pay and employment and the impact of education on future income. The trio will share a cash prize of $1.1 million.
In memory of Alfred Nobel.
And the headlines again here on Global Business Europe. The EU versus Poland and Hungary. Europe's top court hears the case. Amid fears Warsaw is moving towards leaving the bloc.
Austria's new chancellor is sworn in as the ruling party fights corruption allegations threatening the government's survival.
And the UK government holds crisis talks with businesses which are seeking help in the face of soaring gas prices.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com and follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on Smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Up next on CGTN Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team in London. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.